Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos back again, and today we'll take a look at the rest of the story with the Alekhine-van Mindeno game from some Dutch simul back in 1933. So last time I kind of did a little freestyle analysis here, trying to figure out how black was supposed to emerge from these complications unscathed. And okay, I didn't see everything, but I saw quite a bit, so I don't feel too bad about my analytical efforts. And they could have continued as well, but I didn't want to have it go for too long, so hopefully it was a reasonable length for everybody. Alright, so anyway, this time what we'll do is, we'll see, first of all, what I got wrong, and then we'll see, we'll calculate, take a further look at what black's best was, which I actually did look at, and what I looked at was right as far as it went, but it was kind of provisional. So I looked at a number of candidate moves here for black. So I looked at knight takes e4, which is what I spent most of my time on. I looked at knight h7 a little bit, and this is in fact the best move. But I only analyzed g6, so I was just giving some kind of quick ideas while listing the candidate moves. And then I went to knight takes e4 first, spent all the time on that, and thought black was doing okay there. Anyway, other moves I looked at were queen takes e4. Or actually, I didn't look at them, I just mentioned them. I also mentioned bishop takes e4, but wasn't too enthusiastic about it because of lines like this. And I also looked at rook f to e8. For no special reason. So just kind of enumerating candidate moves. But as I said, all the time was spent on knight h7 and especially on knight takes e4. Okay, so knight takes e4 is the main line, and a lot of what I looked at was right, but there were some inaccuracies to be sure. Okay, so I spent most of my time on rook to h5, and my analysis of this was actually quite good. There was one move that I should have looked at that I didn't, though. So in one of the subvariations, so f5, which was the right move, so get some ups for that one. Let's see, and then I think, let me see. All right, yeah, g6, queen e6, rook d to h1, and queen takes g6. Oh no, okay, sorry, it was knight e5, queen a2. Yeah, and then here I looked at a few moves. I looked at queen takes e4. So the point is black is starting queen to a1 mate, but white wants to play rook d to h1 and rook h8 mate. So that was what motivated queen takes e4. So I looked at that. I looked at queen c4 check, just getting the queens off, and I looked at c3. I know b3 flashed through my mind for a second, but I didn't take the time to look at it carefully, which is a little bit too bad, because this is, I think, clearly white's best move here. So the queen on d4 covers a1, and also the other advantage to this, well, there are a few, but another advantage that's pretty clear is that now this diagonal is again unopposed, at least by black's queen. So white is still worse here, still in trouble, but this is, I think, his best chance. So let's take a look at some possibilities. Now, knight f6 is best, hitting the rook, and also shoring up the d5 point. So on queen c4 check, there's d5 and everything's adequately covered, I think. Yeah. Okay, so actually I didn't mention that line, but here's how this could go. So here, and, well, okay, right, the point is, on something like this, I mean, there's just too many things hanging. So, I mean, you can't sacrifice the rook here and then play rook d to h1 because you don't have this second rook. So this line is just junk. Alright, so two possibilities here. Knight takes e6, and just retreating the rook to h2. So here, okay, we still have to retreat the rook, and the black king is going to scurry away. So white's not lost. I mean, he's got some chances still. But black's king is basically safe, and he should probably win in the long run. I mean, it's up a piece. White's g-pawn is pretty annoying, but I think black can just play king to b7, and as soon as he works his queen back into the game, it should just be over, I think. Anyway, that would be one interesting possibility. Another line is rook to h2, Now bishop to e4, threatening mate on c2, queen c4, d5, and now white can try a few little tricky last gasps, but in the end it's not good. So try number one, rook d to h1. Okay, on this we know the cure. We looked at some lines like this last week. So black just checks and gives up his queen for a rook, but it's not really giving up anything because he gets the white queen in. Here black's a rook, bishop, and pawn ahead. Okay, second try, queen c3. So preserve the queen and also covering the a1 square and preparing to double rooks on the h-file. So knight to g4. The point of this is just to get rid of the white knight. Takes, and now, okay, if rook h7, threatening mate on g7, then the black queen comes back to the rescue. On rook d to h1, again, this looks promising, but black can wriggle out of this. Check, bishop g6, and the queen again comes back to e7, saving the day. So black wins here. Alright, last line is knight f7. So we sack the queen. Not really, because rook h8 mate. So check, and now we play here. And after all of these adventures, we end up with a pretty murky position, frankly. But ultimately this has to be better for black. So it looks like, actually, yeah, white picks up the bishop too. But even so, black is still clearly better here with 3 pawns for the exchange. His king's actually pretty safe. Okay, not maybe 100% safe, but safe enough. And in fact, white's king is in a little bit of trouble too. So this would have been very, very interesting, but it looks as if black still comes out on top here. So this is a line that I should have looked at. Okay, another line I should have looked at was, okay, on queen e6, rook d to h1. Queen takes g6, knight e5. Oh no, this is just a little tactical error, but one that doesn't affect the overall variation. So I looked at queen h5, rook h5, de, queen e5, and then here, okay, I gave knight f2, which is just bad because of queen e6 check, and then rook takes f5. But I basically assessed this whole line is clearly better for black, and it's right. You should just throw in rook a to e8 first instead. Okay, so the basic contours of that variation were completely right. Alright, so that's all that I want to say as far as corrections on this rook h5 line. So knight e4, rook h5. I don't think I had anything to say further about rook h4. Yeah, so this I just dismissed because of this. But rook h2, a couple of people noted that I missed something substantial. After knight takes g5, I looked at rook d to h1 and just said, okay, f6, no big deal. And I spent more time on knight takes g5, queen g5, f4, but ultimately this came out short too. But I missed something pretty big, which was rook h8 check. So Peter91 and Graham Morrison both mentioned this. So king takes, queen h4, and knight g5. Now, in fact, this position is pretty acceptable for black. Takes, here, rook h1, let's say, rook e6, and black doubles rooks. And okay, white's a little bit better, but they're not winning this by any means. Black has a rook, bishop, and a pawn for the queen. But still, this is enough to overturn my conclusion that black is just somehow much better in this variation. Also, though, in fact, even after f5, g6, ironically, instead of knight takes g5, black can play f5, which I thought he couldn't because of g6, queen e6, rook d to h1 takes knight e5, which wins. But simply rook f6. And we saw lines like this too, and this position is approximately equal. So black is okay here. He's not worse after 14 rook h2, but he's also not better. Okay, so what this means is that we have to look at knight h7. So this is, in fact, the best move. Now, as I said, all I looked at was g6, and my analysis of that was correct. but we can look at all the usual plans with building on the h-file. And there's some very interesting variations here. Okay, let's start with rook takes h5. Okay, protecting the g5 pawn and preparing a double. Against this, black wins by taking on e4. Bishop takes e4 wins, or queen takes e4. And now, okay, white can choose between doubling immediately and retreating the queen. If he doubles immediately, then queen takes d4 is winning. If rook takes h7, black uses a familiar trick. Okay, queen f4 check, f5 giving himself the f7 square, and on g6, queen h6. So again, we return the queen, and we'll have a big material advantage at the end of it. So black will be up a full rook. So white might as well take the queen, but now bishop e4. Now white has one more try here, f3, and then hoping to close the cage on this bishop and try to show that these guys are all kind of little too clogged here. But f5, and black is just winning. Knight e6, move the rook out of the way, and then maybe king f7, and that should be winning. Even probably knight f8 should be just fine too. So anyway, black is up a piece for what's getting to be pretty close to absolutely nothing at this moment. Alright, so after queen takes e4, white should probably try retreating the queen to c3. But black will continue to put pieces on this b1h7 diagonal. So queen g4, attacking the rook, and now bishop to e4. And white has one last little bit of trickiness here with g6. But all this ends up being is a big trade. So at the beginning of this, black is up a full piece. Okay, so g6, bishop takes, rook takes, and if king h7, knight g5 check, of course, but after simply f6, stopping the mate on g7, and then queen takes a2, black is up the exchange and 2 pawns as well. So actually black came out ahead in that transaction. Okay, so we can reject rook h5 then. So again, we're here, h takes g5 is where we started, knight h7, and now g6 we dismissed last time, rook h5 we just dismissed a moment ago. Okay, now e5 is a bit more clever, threatening queen h4, but black can take care of this. Bishop takes f3, so if queen h4 now, queen takes g5 check. So we've seen lots of variations where that check just completely thwarts white's attacking ambitions. We've also seen some times where black plays queen takes a2, so you can definitely see how king to b1 can be a very, very useful move in a variation like this. Anyway, after bishop takes f3, white should try g takes f3, but still d e5, and it's the same problem. This is check. Okay, so e5 doesn't work just yet, but we can try some other ways of finessing it. So for instance, rook h7 first, and now rook h1 check. Okay, here if king g6, black gets mated. Here's one way to do it. Okay, so after rook h1 check, the king should go back, and now e5. So now there's not going to be any queen takes g5 check after this. Okay, well what should black do here? Well, certainly not f6. Incredibly, this happened in a tournament game between Furtado and Peruti, played in Buenos Aires in 1987. Black, of course, resigned after g6. Hard to believe that black could have done that, but anyway. The right move is, of course, f5. So that way on g6, we just swap queens. Now here, white can try both captures en passant and g takes f3, but none of them are winning. So just kind of quickly here, if gf, gf, gf again. How often do you get that 3 times in a row? Anyway, t takes e5 is very simple, and there's no mate. I mean, black can, or white can win the queen with queen h8 and rook h7. Well, actually, you can't even win the queen, because if he tries that, then king g6. And there's no way for white to win a rook out of the bargain here. So this is just lost. The queen is going to escape. If queen g4, queen g7. If rook g1, king f7. So the king escapes, the queen escapes, and black enjoys his extra rook. Okay. If e takes f6, then just gf and queen g7, and there's no way for white to exploit the g file, or the h file for that matter. And finally, if g takes f3, then king f7, and the king scurries off to safety. Okay, so back here, that means that rook takes h7, and then e5 after all this doesn't work either. So one more try, and that's rook h4. And this one is actually really pretty tricky, amazingly enough. Okay, so again, just like on, well, here there's no bishop takes e4 or queen takes e4. So that's, of course, the difference with the rook h5 lines. Now taking on g5 is not very good here. White white will double and actually be in very good shape. And I believe so. And so finally, however, insufficient is rook f to e8. Again, threatening to take on e4. So if rook d to h1, he can take, and it's winning. All right, so white has two other tries here. Rook takes h7 is the first we'll look at. Here, and e5 once again. Well, what to do this time? The answer is queen e6, and on queen h4, simply king f8, and the king will come out via e7 and win. But there is one really pretty nasty try that white still has. Actually, you might want to see if you can figure it out for yourself. And both figure it out from white's point of view and how black survives it. Okay, well the answer is g6. Very, very tricky. So for instance, if f takes g6, then rook d to h1. And now, okay, what does black do to save his knight? If he goes to f6, he gets mated right away. Check and mate. If he brings the knight to f8, it's better, but it's still losing. See if you can figure out how it loses. Queen c4 check. And now if knight e6 takes, very clever, and knight to g5 with a double attack, threatening the queen, of course, and mate on h8. So black has to run away, but now we take, and if the king comes up, then knight takes c7, rook takes e6 is best, but white is still winning after rook takes a8 with a full extra exchange. Okay, and finally after rook d to h1, so we looked at trying to save the knight, can't do it. So queen f6 is best, but still white is better after rook takes h7. He's not down any material any longer, and his pieces are all very active. Okay, so after g6, f takes g6 is bad for black. The right move is knight to f8. But there's still some tricks. Okay, well first of all, what's not tricky is rook d to h1. Then knight takes g6, covers h8, and on rook h7, queen f6 stops the mate threat, and the attack is basically over. But okay, g takes f7 is still a little bit dangerous. So queen takes f7, threatening to take on a2. So king to b1, rook a to d8, and knight to g5. And now we still have a little bit of tricky business. So queen f6, queen c4 check, d5, e takes d5, and now the best move here for black is b5. White can't play queen takes c6 because black would trade queens and play rook takes d1 mate. So queen b3 is right, and then queen takes g5, and the rook is hanging on h4. Anyway, so dc6 check, rook e6, and kind of remarkably, there isn't any way for white to exploit this. So it looks like black is kind of vulnerable with this pinned rook on e6, and the rook on d8 is slightly loose, but there's just nothing to be done with it. And at the end of the day, black is up a piece for 2 pawns, and his pieces are doing pretty decent work where they are. So they're all pretty active. The c6 pawn is loose. The g2 pawn is loose. The rooks are kind of loose as well. And all right, it's maybe not a trivial position yet, but it is winning for black. Okay, so with that, then we can say that knight h7 is winning. So I think that covers all the main variations to be seen. So all that remains to be discussed is what actually happened in the game. So the game saw knight takes e4, which is right. Here, we already established that rook to h2 is right, but Alekhine played rook to h5, which is very, very natural. And here, okay, as I said, my analysis of f5 I think was basically right on the money, and black is much better there. But Van Mindeno played queen to e6, and this loses. So it's the right kind of idea, but doing it the wrong way around loses. So the right way, as I said, was f5, and the point is that after rook d to h1, which we mentioned, black escapes with king to f7. Okay, in the game though, queen e6 happened, rook d to h1, f5, and now it's too late. So see if you can figure out why. Of course, we looked at this idea repeatedly last time, so I'm sure you'll find it very easily if you watch the last show. It's knight e5, which is very, very nice. And now, okay, if queen takes e5, white can win two ways. Either queen takes e5 with the point that d takes e5, g6 forces mate on h8. Of course, black could bring his king out at this point, but it should be hopeless for him in the long run if he does. And even better, though, is g6. Queen f4, queen e3, and black can't avoid the mate even by giving up the queen, because takes, and there's nothing to be done about queen h8 mate, for example. Okay, so instead of queen takes e5, black played d takes e5, but now g6, and black resigned because after g6, queen takes g6, queen c4 check, and at some point black is going to have to put a piece on the f7 square, and once he does, rook h8 is mate. Okay, well, I hope that was entertaining, and I don't know if I would say instructive, but beneficial, yes. So I think positions like this, analyzing a position like this is very, very useful for one's chess. Not because you're ever going to see this position, although you might. I mean, if you face people who play the Philidor or the Steinitz defense, it could be useful. But it's just the actual practice of analyzing complicated positions that is one of the best things that you can do to improve your game, to improve your performance level. So from that standpoint, I hope it was useful for you. Hope it was useful for myself as well, but for you guys especially. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.